lot for me.
That being said, Peter Thiel has a quote that goes like this: "Sales is hidden. The best salespeople hide in plain sight." Actually, they don't even have sales in their job title. You know, like people who sell ads are called account executives. People who sell businesses are called investment bankers. And people who sell themselves are called politicians. But what's partly funny is actually also true, right? Peter Thiel is onto something. Like, sales is hidden, but why? Why do we have to hide sales? And there are a couple of reasons, right? One of the reasons, of course, is that sales has a bad reputation, and sales can be annoying in some cases. But for companies, it can also be hard to figure out, can be expensive. But there is a more profound reason for why sales is hidden so often. And that's because times have changed, right? Nowadays, we live in a time of content abundance, of constant interruption, and basically, attention has become a commodity, right? We become aware of that, we realize that, and we start to protect attention. And that means whatever interferes with our attention, whether it's salespeople or it's ads somewhere, is something that we're not a fan of, that we might even hate. Or, like, for example, me, I even hate to be called on the phone. That's weird, but I know a lot of people like that. More and more people blocking their social media and so on and so on. But I'm not here to say that sales sucks, okay? Don't remember me as the guy who hates on sales and bashes sales and says sales is unnecessary. That's not me. Remember me as the guy who looks at things a little differently. But the truth is that sales exists on a spectrum. Clicker. Sales exists on a spectrum. It's not black and white. There is no sales or no sales. Basically, there is this kind of rule of thumb that the higher priced your product is, the more sales you need. And sales in terms of sales people and sales effort. You can put that on a graph like this, where you have the customer lifetime value down here, and you have the sales needed up here. And if we put a couple of companies on that graph, we see companies like MailChimp or Dropbox down here, pretty self-service. We have HubSpot and Salesforce more in the middle. They're sales-driven, but they still invest in marketing. And then we have companies like Oracle and IBM at the top. If there's a virus that breaks out tomorrow and all salespeople die, then those businesses go under real fast. They die. So far and so much about the general rule of thumb. But it's actually not true. Actually, that curve has a slope at the end. There are companies like Palantir and SpaceX who have only one salesperson, but their products are hell of expensive. Anybody knows who the salespeople are of Palantir and SpaceX? Educated guess? Sorry? Yes, Elon Musk. So CEOs. They travel a lot and close a lot of deals. But there's even more to that graph. There are outliers, like Atlassian, Slack, Basecamp, a couple of other companies. They are in a higher priced product segment, but have no sales teams. And that's the topic of my presentation today. It's how. How do they do that? We already talked about how Palantir and SpaceX solved that problem, but how do Basecamp, Slack, Dropbox, and a couple other companies that we'll get to know handle that? And the reason for why I want to tell you that is, first of all, I realize there's a couple of people who actually founded SaaS startups, but I also want to help you avoid spending money on things that you don't have to spend money. I want to make it successful. And it's actually part of my mission, and I take that very seriously. So that's my why. My why is that I believe that technology can substantially improve our lives, and I want to do my best to make the right technology visible and successful to the right people. And I do that at the German Accelerator, where I mentor startups in terms of growth marketing, and at Atlassian, where I run technical SEO. And Atlassian has customers like the White House or NASA. This is what our projected or our reported revenue looks like in the press. Goes in the right direction, I would say. We're forecasted to make 1 billion in revenue next year, and we just crossed the 100,000 customer landmark. But we're not alone. There is, of course, other companies that you heard of, Slack. They're growing like crazy. And the question again is, what are these companies doing that they can afford to not have a sales team but grow exponentially? And the whole thing comes down to 3 components. And the first one is called land and expand. And land and expand is also known as seed and grow sometimes. And the first takeaway lesson that you need is to know that it's a business model. It's not something you can just put on your product or in your company. It has to be ingrained in the DNA. It has to be ingrained in product and marketing. To give you a couple more examples of companies who do that, we have also Yammer, we have Splunk, this is Basecamp, DocuSign, and there are a bunch more companies. So it's all about land and I spoke about land and expand, and it really comes down to, in a nutshell, of starting with a single user, then expanding to a team, expanding to a department, and then expanding to the whole company. And that is the opposite of the traditional sales model that is more of a top-down sales model, where you would send salespeople to convince the CTO or the head of engineering or maybe the CEO to close a deal with you. Land and expand is bottom-up. So there are 3 things that you need to implement land and expand for your company. And I want to start with the top one. It's product market fit. I'm sure all of you have heard of it. Don't need to go all too deep into it, but it's basically the point at which you have built something that people love. And if that's not quantifiable enough for you, then you can look at stuff like retention rate, growth rate, or net promoter score. The other 2 things are a little more sophisticated, market and product. And as you see, they're all connected. So let's jump in a little deeper into those 2 components. I want to start with market. So my colleague already spoke about competition. I think it's a big topic. Coming back to the example of Atlassian, when Mike and Scott, the 2 co-founders, created Atlassian in, I think it was Sydney, in Australia for sure, about 15 years back in their dorms, and they bootstrapped the whole thing. The only competitor on the market was Bugzilla. And that's, by the way, where the name of our flagship product, Jira, comes from, because in Japanese, Godzilla, which is the opponent of Bugzilla, is Gojira, and that's why our product is named Jira. But coming back to the actual thing I want to talk about here is, when they started out, the market was not super saturated, right? And so the first lesson is, when you look at the market and you see a lot of competitors pushing traditional sales models, then don't go for land and expand. That is a bad idea, because you will not be able to push through that. Next is pricing, of course. When we have to look at the market, we have to talk about pricing. And before you make the decision between land and expand and a traditional sales approach, you have to think about, can I afford a sales team at all? And that's where this overview comes in play. So if your customer lifetime value is below $1,000, then you cannot afford a sales team. Plain and simple, right? You don't make enough money. If it's between $1,000 and $5,000, then you can think about it, but it has to be very low-touch sales, and the product has to be easy to sell. So, and then if it's above 5,000, then yeah, sure, you can go for a sales team. You don't have to. This is just a rough guideline. Next topic, of course, inbound marketing. It's a huge pillar of any land and expand strategy. Starting with SEO, which is kind of my forte. SEO is obviously very important to Atlassian. So here you should see the development of our keywords. So every curve that goes up and to the right is good. But what it tells you is that we're investing heavily in SEO. We're yielding the results. It's a big user acquisition channel for us. But it's also a big user acquisition channel for Slack. What you see here is the so-called SEO visibility. It's a performance indicator for SEO. That's all you need to know. And in blue, you see the performance of Slack.com. And in green, you see the performance of a subdirectory called apps. And that tells us that Slack gets most of their organic traffic with their integrations. They have very good integrations with all sorts of other apps, and we'll come back to that. But when we talk about SEO, we really have to talk about content as well. And I like to, or generally people like to cluster content into 3 different categories. There's top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, pretty much like a sales funnel, right? And so at the top of the funnel, you have informational, educational content, means you don't push your brand at all. In the middle, the user or the potential client has an idea of the solution he wants to get, but hasn't made a decision yet. And at the bottom, you push your product hardcore, right? You just scream it out in the world. And so 20 years ago, it worked pretty well to have a distribution of 10, 10, 80, where most of your content just blows your product out in the world, you know. But nowadays, doesn't really work like that anymore. Nowadays, if you think about SEO and you think about content, you would rather go for something like a 60, 30, 10, where most of your content is purely educational, purely informational, delivers value, and then you have a little sprinkle of your product that you throw in between. The next channel for inbound marketing that I think is really important is email. And this is our Trello newsletter, has millions of subscribers. And email aggravates me a little bit because everybody says email is dead, and it's really not. Shitty email is very much dead. Good email is very much alive. I hate it when people treat their emails like trash cans or recycle bins or whatever, and just puke out their products into the world and expect users to like that or forward that to their friends. Nobody does that. Nobody does that. I have a lot of friends. They have a lot of emails. Nobody ever forwarded me like a product email. On the other hand, there are some emails that do a really good job in delivering exclusive content. Imagine what would happen if you had an influencer in your industry write exclusive content only for your email. Or you give away exclusive beta access, or something exclusive, something of value that only your email subscribers get. And one good example that came to mind is Azim Azar's newsletter. He's like a tech expert, and he has hundreds of thousands of subscribers. He's a single person. I think he writes weekly or bi-weekly. And he recently had a specialist and expert on the Chinese tech market on. And it was like a whole, essay about everything you need to know about the Chinese market. And that's really good content. And those emails, those are getting forwarded. Those are getting shared. That's the good stuff. Go for that. Social, of course, organic social is also part of inbound marketing. And basically in connection to what I said before, we share a lot of educational, informational content, like how to estimate and show work using Kanban. We try to not advertise our product as well, because at the same time, organic reach on social media goes down pretty hard. But there are still ways you can effectively harvest that. So Slack, for example, they have their Slack Wall of Love, which not a lot of people know about, but which works really well. Actually, Twitter was really fundamental in Slack's growth, at least in the beginning. And they just pin users' tweets that praise the product here. That's all they do. But they engage with the community. Here it says, please tweet and blah, 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 and connect with us and DM us and whatnot. So, that's the way to go about it. Go out and engage with your community. And then we have the rest of inbound marketing, videos, podcasts, etc. This is a podcast from Intercom. And they have Ryan Hoover from Product Hunt on there recently. Very good way to engage community and provide some helpful content. They push out free books. If you push out a really good free book, that still works like hell. Basecamp has the Rework podcast, which is also very, very successful. They put out tons of articles on Medium. They have their Signal versus Noise blog, which also works really well. And they take a whole kind of stance. They have the whole narrative on their blog and on their podcast, which is that, work doesn't have to be draining, and not every company has to be greedy, and not every company needs to scale exponentially. You can think of that whatever you want, but they have a very clear narrative and story that they communicate on many channels. And another company that does it really well is called Moz. It's an SEO tool, also B2B company. And they have been releasing an educational video once a week for over 10 years. So they've been going hardcore at that. This is an influencer called David Hennemeyer Hansen. You might know him. He founded Basecamp. And he's pretty vocal out there in the tech world, I would say. And he gave a shout out to a company called New Relic. And that's worth a ton, right? So you shouldn't only connect on social with your users, but also other influencers and proponents of the narrative that you're trying to tell. Because after all, as a startup, you're trying to solve a problem, and there's a high chance that you're not the only one trying to solve that problem. So connect with those people and multiply. And then community, or are you talking about social media? Community is another completely estimated growth channel that I find highly effective. And what I mean by that is to create your own closed environments where you can control users. I mean, not control in a bad way, but you know what I mean, where you have control of the platform to engage with users. And at Atlassian, for example, we have our online version of that. That's the Atlassian community, where we identify product champions and power users. But we also have the offline equivalent, something like that, a meetup, an Atlassian meetup, where people can teach each other. They can, learn some stuff and whatnot, and that's very vital. Slack does something as well. They have a couple of meetups around different cities because they understand how important it is and how much you can get out of that. And then I think there was New Relic, who also who also creates regular meetups. And what I don't understand is how underestimated it is, because not only can you engage with your community, but you can also check how's my product market fit. Like, especially as a young startup, having that kind of feedback from users face to face is super valuable. You can bring your computer and show your product and then see how people react to it. And people just don't use that at all, which I don't understand. Because at the same time, if people like it, you can get some early customers, right? You can get people to sign up for your product, hopefully. Anyway, so much about market. Next is product. And starting with product, I think one of the most important factors is frictionless onboarding. Make it easy for people to get in your product, right? In Trello, this is the Trello homepage. We have 2 sign-up buttons here. It takes you 1 click, and you're in this little form, which has 3 fields, and then you're in the product. And then you can start experiencing the value of this product. Another good example is BrightCrowd. I think it takes 1 click and you're in the freaking product. Join with Gmail here. You just need to verify that they can have access to that account, and then you're in, right? And so Crowdfire, they solved that really, really intelligently. They have the onboarding process wrapped up in a messenger app. So you say, I want to sign up, and then they're like, oh yeah, cool, hey, what's your name? You say, my name's Kevin, and then, oh yeah, what's the email, and blah, blah, blah. And they ask you all this information in a playful way. Works like a charm. Like, very, very creative. So there's a lot you can improve when it comes to onboarding. But the biggest issues I see is companies that have to fill out a form with 10 fields to get in the product. Do not do that. Easy referral goes into the same kind of category, right? This is a screenshot from Confluence, another one of our products, basically like a wiki. We don't like to say it, but it's true. You can share a page on Confluence with somebody. And if that somebody doesn't have an account yet, they will get an invite, very quick and easy invite. So make it easy to for people to invite their friends, and we'll talk about that in a little second, about how to quantify that and calculate that a little more. Efficient scalability. So the product should solve a problem for a small team, but also solve problems for a big team. That sounds very simple, but when you think about how can I appeal to a group of 5 people and then a group of, or a whole company, then it starts to become a little more complicated. But that's something you have to solve in order to scale throughout the company. And a good way is freemium, or first user free, better said. Let's not say freemium, let's say first user free. So Trello, for example, you can sign up and you can use the product yourself all of your life and will not charge you. And the reason for why that first user free works so well is because you get hooked by the product. You experience it and you get hooked. And one, hi construction workers, it's all good, it's all good. But one story that comes to mind when we talk about first user free is actually the story of 50 Cent. And I just read that on a plane right here in a book from Ryan Holiday, which is really good, Perennial. He's free advertising, Ryan. But the 50 Cent story is basically when he started out as a crack dealer in New York. He had a team that went out to other crack dealers to rob them their crack and then give it away for free. That's freaking brilliant. I mean, you can say whatever you want. But on the one hand, people get free stuff. On the other hand, they get addicted to the product. And the third factor is that you're the only one with the product. I'm just saying, I'm not saying do drugs, I'm not saying sell drugs, I'm saying get your people on the product and get them hooked. That's the takeaway message here. Network effects, it plays into the second part of the 3 components that you need for that whole model. And network effects, I think basically to summarize it is, the more people use your product, the better the product becomes. An example is a fax machine. If you're the only person with a fax machine on the planet, then that doesn't help you much, right? But if there's lots of people with a fax machine, it's very attractive. Or think of Facebook, modern example. And those network effects give us a huge competitive advantage, and they can lead to viral growth or word of mouth growth, but they're not the same. I think it's very important to distinguish between the two. And so, you cannot simply attach network effects to a product. It doesn't work. Once again, it has to be ingrained in the product. It has to be part of the product. When we talk about network effects, we talk about two different types of network effects, the homogeneous and heterogeneous. That's very hard to say. Say that 3 times really fast. And in the B2B space, we mostly deal with the homogeneous ones. And I give an example. So Slack, for example, is a product that's built on homogeneous network effects, and Zapier is built on heterogeneous network effects. So imagine that basically on Slack, every Slack user is connected to another Slack user, named Slack, here and there. On the other hand, in Zapier, users are connected to apps, right? It's basically a two-sided market. It's a completely different type of business approach and a different way to harvest those network effects. Let's go a little deeper. There's something that's called degree of networks. And we'll put the whole puzzle together. I know it's a little lot right now. There's something called the degree of the network effects. And that basically says how many possible connections can one user have to another user. And if you look, the maximum number here is 3. So the degree of the network is 3, because that's the highest amount that a node is connected to others. And that tells you a lot about how you have to optimize the product, and how you have to go about it. If you have one person, like on Facebook, connected to 1,000 people, that means you have to, at scale, start thinking differently about the product. That's why they filter out content and have all these algorithms in it. On the other hand, if you have just 3 connections through the whole product lifecycle, then it's a completely different approach. And so, for example, for Slack, I know it's a long text, you don't have to read it all. The takeaway message is that by identifying the degree of the network effects, they figured out that if a team sends back and forth 2,000 messages, then 90% of those teams are probable to still use Slack today. So that's a huge, if you figure that out, that's huge for a company. You have to figure that out. There's another thing. There is the clustering coefficient. And what sounds very complicated basically just means how many different connected groups do you have on your network, right? So say, for example, that the gray Slack symbols here are engineers and the colored ones are managers. So by looking at that and identifying that pattern, you understand that engineers are pretty well connected on your network, but managers are left outside, right? They're isolated. Super important to think about. How can you then reduce the friction? How can you make that product more attractive to be used by managers? Super important when we talk about land and expand and scaling within the company. And those network effects, they compound each other, right? So for Slack, the more users they have, the lower is their customer acquisition cost. The more users they have, the higher their integrations, because then they can go to other apps and say, hey, we have all these users, you better integrate with us because we're best in breed, we're best in class. And then the more data they get, the less friction they have in their product, because they can better map out all the interactions of users with their product. So as you hear, there's a theme that's lower friction as much as possible in order to scale up. And it's the same with everything. It's the same when it comes to marketing and to product. And to quickly close that chapter out in terms of virality. So what do we do with virality? Because that's a super hot topic right now. There is a mathematical formula to calculate out, or to basically get a number of how viral your product is, and that's K is the K factor. Most people hate that, but whatever. K equals I times CR, and that basically means the virality of your product is the invitations times the conversion rate. So how many people does one user invite, and how likely are they to convert on your platform or with your product? Of course, the K factor has to be higher than 1 for viral growth to occur, right? If nobody invites other people, then you cannot grow virally. And there's another factor that goes into this equation as well, and that's the cycle time. Basically, how long does it take from the first touch of the user with the product until they convert? And if you have those two factors, K and T, then you have a pretty good idea about how viral your product goes. But there's a simpler way to get to virality if you really want it. 3 basic questions. How do we get users into the door? How do we get them to the aha moment as quickly as possible? And how can we deliver product value as often as possible? If you think about these 3 questions, you don't have to do any fancy calculations. In most cases, it will all take care of itself. And then lastly, we talk about how do we get the people on board, like flywheels. So what is a flywheel? Actually, a flywheel is the idea that you have a sort of self-sustaining system that, with a little effort, kind of sustains itself and compounds itself, and you just have to keep on pouring gasoline in it and then get synergetic effects. And I know it sounds a little blurry, but we'll go into specifics here. That's an example of a flywheel. So it exists of 3 different channels: SEO, email, and social. And so the user journey here would be, you start with, say you have a landing page or a microsite on your site. People find it on Google because they were looking for an answer to a problem or a question. On that microsite or landing page, they sign up for the newsletter. On the newsletter, they get super duper awesome content, and then they share that content on social media. And then on social media, because it has such a high buzz, people will create backlinks on their blogs or on their sites, and that helps the landing page again, right? So it's a whole cycle, it's a whole process. There's another example of community SEO and social, where say you provide exclusive content, say you invite an industry expert for an AMA and Ask Me Anything on your Slack channel, right? It's super interactive and engaging. And then you write an article for your blog of that AMA afterwards. And then, you share that article, and that creates links to the article from other sites and from, to the community. And then you share that again on social, and then more people sign up to your community. So it's another flywheel where once you get it going, you just need to keep pushing it a little bit, but your effort is way lower. And so the question is, how can you identify these flywheels? It's all nice, but how do you actually do that? And the answer is through the user journey. And this is obviously a whole topic in and of itself, but just to give you a rough idea of what that looks like, you have different stages for your product. Like people become aware of your product, people become aware of their problem. They start researching solutions. They find some stuff and consider which one is the right solution for them, and then they make a decision. And along that process, the user has different touch points with your product and with different channels. And when you map that out, then it looks like that. It's fictional, so it's nothing. It's not a real life example, but when you download the slides, you can go through that and better understand it. But it becomes interesting when you look at things vertically and horizontally. So horizontally, you go from the different channels where people have the touch points, and then you get a better idea of basically what that flywheel could look like, and how you could close the loop. Right, so that's basically something where you have to put a little creative work in up front, map those out, verify those by numbers, and then see where do I have a potential for a flywheel, right? And then you implement that, you test it out, and you verify it with numbers. It's all about hypothesis. But then when you look at it vertically, right, where people are in the consideration phase, for example, they come to your landing page, they consume the content, so they have a touch point with your website, and then you could further channel them on with retargeting, so you get them into some sort of funnel. That's where all these cool growth hacks come around, right? That's where people then reduce friction, for example, to get to the landing page by optimizing it for SEO or something like that. And that's what you read in the news and the cool blog articles where people talk about awesome growth hacks, but they won't help you much because they're not tied to your user journey and not to your product and not to your market. But anyway, I don't want to go on a rant too much here. I just wanted to, introduce you how to get to your flywheel, and it's basically all about reducing friction. So, coming back, it's about 3 different components. It's about land and expand, network effects, and the flywheel. And to close the loop here, I want to close with another Peter Thiel quote, and he said, "Look around. If you don't see any salespeople, you're the salesperson." And the truth is, we all have to sell. It's a business, but there's more than one way. Thank you. Thank you. By the way, I write a newsletter called TechBound about growth marketing for founders and marketers. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up for free. It's hand curated, no spam, and we'll upload the slides, or the family will provide them, whoever.
Hi. Thank you for the presentation, and then also you had a lot of energy.
Thanks, man. I hope that's a good thing, or not too bouncy.
I'm a very young startup. I just launched my platform like a couple of weeks back. So one of the cheapest way to get traffic is SEO, right? So what's a realistic time frame to expect the SEO to be at a decent stage? Like, it'll obviously not happen overnight. So what should be the expectation? Like 2 years, 5 years? Is there like, in 3 months or 6 months, you could be like top in your domain in SEO, or it's just not possible? Is it a long-term strategy?
What's your goal?
To drive traffic.
How much?
Probably like 100,000 users.
Okay, that will take a while. Depends on 100,000 users in a week, in a day, or in a month. But let's assume in a month, right? That's usually the way to go about it. A day will take a little longer. Well, first of all, you have to understand which keywords that traffic can come from, right? So there's a tool from Google. It's free. It's called the Keyword Planner. It's part of AdWords, and that you can punch in keywords and you can see how many people search for them in a month, right? So I think the first step you need is at least a high-level idea of the keywords you want to rank for that bring you the actual traffic, right? That will give you also a good idea of how competitive these keywords are. Google gives you a metric for that, but you can also just Google these keywords and see who ranks high, right? If it's Wikipedia all across the board and then Amazon and then Facebook, right? That's a tough field to be in. If it's a lot of no-name blogs, it's much easier. Now, as a new site, you also will need some time to just get ramped up, and you can speed that up by, for example, creating content. Seeking, some exposure on communities, in the press, and all that kind of stuff. That will definitely help you. But I have not yet seen a site getting to 100K monthly views, page views that is, under 3 months. So I think that's like a minimum amount.
3 months, okay.
Hi. So on the topic of SEO, I think one of the things that's, of course, you've been recommending and a lot of people are recommending is writing content. And I think in a lot of people's experience, it's not so easy to always get traffic, right? Just because you're writing doesn't mean that people will discover your content, and, you'll kind of pour your heart out into a blog post, and in the end, like 20 people read it, or you share it, and like your friends are sharing it on LinkedIn or something like that, but that's about it. I think most people know that you need to really build your backlinks and really like invest into your cornerstone content. But how do you make sure that something that is more high frequency, such as a blog, actually catches on?
Well, there are obviously a couple of technical things you can do, but apart from that, one of the biggest kind of bombs you can throw out that have compounding effects is if you get an expert from the industry or an influencer to blog on your blog. And at the same time, you do the reverse. You seek out 10 blogs that are not super, all the way matured where you can't get in at all, but blogs where you see people post regularly and they post long content and they post good content. You reach out to them and you ask them if you could provide, a guest article or something like that. Plus you tell them you have all these cool followers that will come on their site. And in best case, you create a small little graphic that they can then share. Make it really easy for them to say yes. And then you create a network, and not only relationship, but also you create some more real estate on other blogs that will then redirect or direct people to your blog, especially when that content is really, really good stuff. So I wouldn't just give the best or the worst content away. I would give my best content away, right? To sites that already have some sort of established community. And then at the same time, try to get influencers. And honestly, sometimes even if you have to pay somebody $500 for a good article, it's worth it after my mind, because it would just accelerate the process so much faster.
Hi. Well, I have a question. Sometimes you read and see these articles how SEO is dead, how keywords don't matter anymore. What are your predictions? What do you think will be the key criteria by which Google ranks the websites?
Oh boy, if I knew that, dude, I'd be a freaking
is it like content,
billionaire.
Context?
See, the thing is, there are a couple of... So, Jeff Bezos is a really smart guy. I think we can all agree with that, And so I pay attention to what he says. And one thing he said is, focus on the things that don't change. And there are a couple of things in SEO as well that will not never change. One of them is speed, right? So make your site as fast as possible. There's no way that's not that's not going to be beneficial in the future. The next is a good UX. Make it super easy for people to consume your content, to get to your product, and all that kind of stuff. So user test. Get a tool like Hotjar or like Inspectlet, and they let you, for free, create heat maps, record sessions of users, really understand what people do on your site. But coming back to your actual question, what do I think is going to be important besides speed? It's definitely going to be content. Content is always a play, right? I mean, Google is now creating its own content, and to stick out, you just have to have something valuable. Again, like people are not going to come to your site without finding value other than your product. Right, it just doesn't work in another way like that. And then I think it always so when I look back over the last 10 years, then there's this trend where SEO transitions into other channels as well, right? So and I think to purely focus on SEO is probably a mistake. I would really build my community on several platforms. So I would merge it. I would merge my strategy with social media networks. I would build up email, all that kind of stuff. Build a following, get it on a closed environment that I mentioned before, like some sort of community or something where you can, where you have them, where you can speak to them, and we can harvest their opinions, and that will also channel back into SEO. So again, I don't think it's going to change 180 degrees tomorrow or even in 2 years, but I think there are some values that hold true, and content, speed, and community are always a good idea to, a good card to play.
Thanks.
I have one question. In creative industries, like artists, for example, they're very much dependent on those social media platforms. That's just one question. Like, how do people make sure they're not too dependent on these platforms? Because if one day YouTube or Twitter decides that they want to charge money, then we're all fucked. So what can we do?
Yeah, it's a good point. So I think you mentioned a couple of true and important things. So first, yes, it's an absolute social media play, no doubt about that. But I think there's still good examples of building a good, SEO kind of backbone that you can rely on when a platform shifts radically, right? Like Facebook organic traffic going down, that's a bit of a problem for some people. So I think a blog where you educate people about the stuff that you do is a fantastic idea. When I think back of, somebody like Gary Vaynerchuk, who constantly preaches to document, not create, then I think that's a perfect play for SEO as well, where you just write about what you learned. Oh yeah, this is that new tactic, or this new angle that I shoot pictures from, or that new filter. People love that stuff and people search on it. Now in conjunction with that, I think besides creative being a big social play, I think it's also a big community play in terms of Reddit and Quora. So there's this whole breed of people who are just starting out, like in every discipline, and they're looking on Quora and Reddit mainly for right now. It might change in the future, right? But I think being present there and outsource or basically presenting some of your content on these platforms in conjunction with some helpful blog articles, and you're golden.
What I meant is not like looking for another platform, but more a customer relation management system, so that I'm not dependent on the data from YouTube, but I have my own kind of system where I can gather my clients, so to say.
Gather your clients. Okay, that's a tough one. I'm not sure if that's a whole marketing play or if that's just a general business play in terms of how you build a relationship with your customers. I think there are many ways, right? It depends on how big your business is. If you have a whole agency, for example, or if you're alone, right? If you're alone, I don't think you have to buy like a huge CRM management tool or something like that. But I think there are other platforms out there. I think HubSpot doesn't do a bad job in merging stuff like CRM and then marketing plays and sales. And then otherwise, there are a couple of free tools that don't really come to mind yet. But I think, again, it depends on how big you are and how big your agency is, or if you're alone. And if you're alone, then start out with an Excel spreadsheet, honestly. Like, don't make it too complicated. Don't rely too much on that. Thanks for coming, guys.
Girl, I found